I have sworn by my blood as your man, my love, that one day, I promise one day your heartache would stop. But I've never changed. I never changed one single grain of sand. Oh, thanks to you, baby. But just love in a common man. I want to thank you this evening. Oh, I thought that I'd failed you so. But that's when you turned around and looked me in my eyes and you let me know. You said, and you said it softly, I didn't have to worry about being a common man. You said, David, you don't have to worry about rising to the top.
Welcome to Talk What You Know, Hard Talk Edition, the 90-day line. The 90-day line. On August 5th, 2026, a federal law that most Americans know little thing about went into effect a little bit too fast. No press conference, no legacy media, nobody knew anything about it. Why is that so important for you and I? Because it's called a quiet period. It's been in effect since 1993. Congress implemented this law in 1993 to make sure that the American voters were protected, to make sure that the American voters had standing. And that's so important for us to understand it, because what happens is that it has impact. It's going to determine oftentimes what you can and what you cannot do. This act, the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, requires elected officials to complete a systematic program to remove ineligible voters from the rolls no later than 90 days before the election period. Now, that's key, that's so important. And that's paramount, because what happens is that Congress had the wherewithal to implement this act. And the purpose of the law is not complicated. Congress wrote it so that if a state makes a mistake and flags a wrong person or removes an ineligible voter by error, then the voter has enough time before the election to make the proper adjustments. Ingenious. Who would know that a 1993 law would have such a tremendous impact in the elections that we're going to face, the midterms? Legacy media hasn't covered it. A lot of people haven't looked at it. But it's going to impact who votes and who cannot vote. Why is that important? Because you have a whole series of things that are going on right now. And the Justice Department is attempting to implement an executive order that was passed by the president that requires all states to provide all intricate data on their voter list. Now, you probably haven't heard a lot about it, but it's going to have a tremendous impact. It's going to impact you, and it's going to impact me. Because what happens is that this executive order now gives Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and a myriad of other departments the opportunity to go in each state and determine who can vote and who cannot vote. Never been done in the history of the United States. Has never happened. As a matter of fact, no executive order of this nature has ever been issued. Through all of the presidents in the history of the United States, no executive order ever been done like this. It really seeks to override the congressional law passed by Congress. And what's interesting about this is that over 30 court cases have been filed on this executive law, and 21 times the administration has lost. There were about 9 of them pending. But the significance of it is that this 90-day rule that just creeped in, and interesting, no one's talking about it. No one's talking about this provision that Congress put in place to protect you, the American voter. It was 1993. It has tremendous impact. What I want to do is I want you to look at this executive order and look at the rationale behind it. And we've discussed this before, the SAVE Act and all this, but some kind of way this 90-day quiet period sort of got away. So what I want to do, Mike, I want to go to that first cut, the president signing that executive order on, let's go to that first clip. President Trump signing that executive order.
And so we're going to be signing an executive order. It's, I believe it's foolproof, and maybe it'll be tested. Maybe
Yeah, y'all are.
I think it's very obvious what's said. And I'll ask Will Scharf to start off, attorney, a great talent, a very brilliant young man, and if you could discuss it, and then I'm going to ask Howard Lutnick to say a few words, and then I'm going to sign it, and we'll take a couple of questions. Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, as you said, you have in front of you an executive order that deals with a number of issues relating to election integrity. As you've consistently identified, two of the biggest problems we have with election integrity in this country are, one, inaccurate voter rolls that allow ineligible people to vote in various federal and state elections all over the country. And secondarily, you've consistently identified that vote by mail in this country has become rife with fraud. People returning ballots who aren't eligible to return ballots, ballots being sent to people who aren't confirmed to be eligible voters. So what this executive order is going to do is, one, we're going to take federal data. We're going to ensure that each state's election officials are provided with a comprehensive view of who the eligible voters in their jurisdiction actually are, allowing them to properly verify that everybody voting in their elections is legally able to vote. And then it orders the Postmaster General and the U.S. Postal Service to take bold new measures to verify that ballots both being sent to people are being sent to people who are eligible to vote, and then that ballots being returned are being properly returned by eligible voters only. And we believe that combined, the measures in this executive order will help secure elections in the future and ensure that the many abuses of our election system in the past aren't repeated in future elections.
Right. Howard?
So the fundamentals of our democracy are built on voter integrity, right? We all need it. You've said it time and time again. It's a total agreement amongst everybody. So here's the idea. The states, right, run these elections. They will, if they want to use the U.S. mail, the U.S. Postal Service, they're going to get a code, a barcode from the U.S. Postal Service, and they're going to put that on the envelope, and we will have one envelope per vote. None of this time where we have no idea, there's no observers to mail, there's no envelopes, there's no certainty. That's all going to go away, and what the president is doing today is he's going to make sure that mail-in ballots are safe, secure, and accurate, and will have a clear distinction. If you voted by mail, you will have it on the envelope. Obviously not on the ballot, but on the envelope. So we will know 1 million mail-in ballots. There'll be 1 million envelopes, and you'll be able to know exactly, correctly, that citizens voted.
And this came up with some great legal minds. They looked at the various documents and everything that was going on, because the cheating on mail-in voting is legendary. It's horrible what's going on. And it's very clearly covered, very, very clearly so. I think this will help a lot with elections. We'd like to have voter ID. We'd like to have proof of citizenship, and that'll be another subject for another time. We're working on that. You would think it would be easy. It's a 98% issue for Republicans. It's 86%. The thing just came out, a poll, and it's 86% with Republicans and Democrats, not leaders, because the leaders of the Democrats cheat. And the only people that don't want to do voter ID are people that cheat. There's no other reason for it. Proof of citizenship, they want to be able to cheat. There's no reason. They have all sorts of reasons, excuses, but it's all nonsense. They want to cheat. But the Democrats themselves are very high. It's a very positive, very, very good thing. The Democrat voters, the Democrat leaders, guys like Schumer, who are corrupt, they want to use it for cheating because their policy is so bad with, think of their policy, open borders for everybody, where people pour into our country from countries all over the world. Think of that. You look at, just take any issue, take anything, everything they have is so crazy. But the fact that they don't want to sign voter ID is another issue. It's a big issue. The fact that they don't have proof of citizenship, that they want transgender for everybody, that they want men in women's sports. So the only way, they assume, the only way they can win is to cheat. When you have men in women's sports, it's fine, it's wonderful. By the way, I worked very hard with the Olympic Committee and got that terminated for the Olympics. Very nice. Now, girls won't have to get beat up in the boxing ring like they did last time, if you saw those fights. Two people that transitioned beat the hell out of everyone, out of other people, women. It was not a pretty sight to watch. So I worked very hard with the Olympic Committee, and we were able to get that out. So the Olympics will not have men in women's sports. But these are the things that they vote on, and that's why we're having a problem with them. They don't want ICE because they don't want people to be taken out of our country that are murderers, that are drug dealers, and that are people from mental institutions, the criminally insane. These are not nice people. And it's amazing. I just, it's not even believable. If you go back 12.
Now, you saw the signing of the executive order in March. And this is the question. Are we looking for, do we have a solution looking for a problem? Let me tell you why I suggest that to you. Mike, put that graph up there. Now, what I want you to see here is that the Brennan Center in 2016 did a survey, and it covered 42 jurisdictions, and they found a total of 32 suspected incidents of non-citizens voting. So that shows a 0.001%. The Center for Election Innovation and Research did a comprehensive study reviewing all allegations across 50 states, and they found little or no voter fraud. The new 21st Initiative Project, a major journalism study out of the University of Arizona, analyzed 2,608 alleged election frauds nationwide from 2000 to 2012, and they found only 56 cases of alleged non-voting over a 12-year period. So are we looking for providing a solution, looking for a problem? Now, the graph that you're looking at is an interesting graph. Georgia, 8.2 million votes, potentially 20 non-citizens voting. That's from 2024. Louisiana, 2.9 million people voting, 390. Now that was done over a 40-year period. 390, 0.1%. Tennessee, 4.3 million people voting, 42 illegals, 0.01%. Idaho, 1 million, 36, 0.03. Then this was done in 24. Arkansas, 1.8 million, 240, done in 25, 0.01%. Now, my question for you today, what's the need for this executive order? The statute itself, the 1993 Voter Registration Act itself, just clearly put provisions in place to deal with this. So what's the purpose of this executive order? Why are we going there? That's the question. That Voter Registration Act was comprehensive. It was bipartisan. It was signed into law. And it requires that election officials, do not remove people from the rolls 90 days out. Because what happens is that they realize that people have to have an opportunity to correct. If you're purged or you're removed, you have to have an opportunity to correct. So they put this provision in to protect you. And lo and behold, it's working. That 90-day cool-off period is working. And it applies in roughly 44 states and the District of Columbia, if memory serves me correct. And it's just so interesting because what happens is that there's an assault that's happening on your right to vote, regardless of what anyone tells you. There's an assault that's happened in Congress. In its wisdom, understand that something had to be done, that you had to be protected. So the purpose of this law is not complicated. Congress wrote it so that if a state makes a mistake, flags the wrong person, or remove that person from the rolls by error, that voter have enough time before the election to correct it and get it fixed. And that's so significant because, as I said earlier, nobody's dealing with this. We're in this 90-day quiet period, and nobody's dealing with it. Nobody's talking about it. We're looking at everything under the sun. We're looking at all of the press conference. Why hasn't legacy media done anything about this? Why is this not being covered? Congress drew a line 90 days out. Large-scale removal is not allowed. Congress put a stop to it. And that is what is protecting you now. This law protects you and I from being removed at any time within that 90-day cool-off period. Now, if a voter dies or moves or is convicted or something of that nature, a disqualifying crime or something like that, you can be removed through the normal process. And those are not abnormalities. Those are giving state governments a right to do it. But the dispute tonight doesn't center around that. No, the dispute tonight centers around this executive order that's requiring states to provide privileged, confidential information to the federal government to set up a national database. Now, we always complain about big government. We always complain about government having so much data. What if the federal government could come in at any time and tell states, remove this person from your roll? So the numbers that I've shared with you don't lie. It's plain and clear that this is a move outside the Constitution. You can't look at it any other way. It's outside the Constitution. So what has happened? 30 plus states has sued the federal government. And they have sued the federal government saying, hey, look, this is not constitutional. And of the 30 suits, the Justice Department has lost 21, 0 wins. What does that suggest to you? Now, I want to bring something to your attention. I got to look at it here. And I want you to just see that we're just not drawing this up. Okay, in West Virginia, U.S. District Judge Thomas E. Johnson wrote, we are quoting the opinion directly here. This is her words. The lack of adequate basis or purpose. The court was left with no wonder what the real purpose, to wonder what the real purpose for the Justice Department demanding this data. Struck it down. In Colorado, U.S. District Judge Phyllis Bremer, a George W. Bush appointee, dismissed Department of Justice case with prejudice, rejecting the administration's argument that the provision of the Civil Rights Act of 1960 gives the Attorney General sweeping authority to obtain his records. They went as deep as to go to the 1960 Voters' Rights Act and said, hey, under the Voters' Rights Act, an act that was passed and designed to protect you, the voter, under that act, we can request this data from the state. Think about it. They've gone as far as to use a piece of legislation that was designed to protect you, to undermine your capacity to vote. This is real. This isn't something that's just imaginary. Now, there are 9 cases left, and those cases are in Delaware, Washington, Georgia, Hawaii, Nevada, Utah, Minnesota, and Idaho. And the irony of this, the department is appealing the ones they lost, saying, hey, look, We have a right to get this information. Now, nowhere in the Constitution does it says that. And what's so important about that? Inside an executive order, it goes to a department that the federal government doesn't control, a department that Congress established, the United States Post Office, and tells the post office, if a state doesn't provide Homeland Security and other myriad of organizations the state database information, do not deliver or receive the ballots. Did you hear what I said? That executive order goes as far as to say, if the states do not provide their confidential database information to the federal government, and there's no time in the history of the United States that we've had a centralized national database that determines who can vote and who cannot vote. It wasn't designed that way. It was designed for each individual state to manage their elections. But this executive order jumps over and says to the, it was issued in March of 26, and the president signed it, that the Department of Homeland Security and the United States Postal Service build a list of citizens that the government considers eligible to vote. Look what I said, a list of citizens that the federal government determines is eligible to vote. Never been done in the history of the United States. Now, I want to take a minute, Mike, and let's go to that second clip, Mr. Anderson explaining what the executive order does, because sometimes you got to see things visually. Just like we showed you the graph where there's hardly any voting irregularities, where we showed you the graph where there's a problem looking for a solution. I want you to hear someone explain to you what this does. Mike, play that second cut by Scott Anderson.
That could change everything, or not. The purpose of this executive order is to set up a registry assembled by the Department of Homeland Security to limit voting to U.S. citizens. President Trump has suggested this executive order is necessary because, in his view, a significant number of non-U.S. citizens have voted in recent elections, and he has suggested that those votes may have contributed to his loss in the 2020 elections. Neither of these allegations have been in any way substantiated. The way the president is planning to implement his executive order is through the U.S. Postal Service, specifically by requiring the U.S. Postal Service to cross-reference who it is delivering absentee or mail-in ballots to ensure that they appear on the federally maintained citizenship list. This is a challenge for the president because the Constitution gives the authority over state elections to state legislatures and to Congress, not to the president. The stakes here are most significant for American voters. If this executive order is implemented, a number of Americans are going to find that all of a sudden they're not able to use absentee ballots or mail-in ballots, and therefore it makes it harder for them to vote. And they may not be able to vote, even though they are constitutionally and legally entitled to do so. There may be other stakes as well. Some believe that this could help tip the results of the midterm elections and subsequent elections in favor of Republicans and of President Trump and his political allies. Whether that's true or not is up for debate, but it's a possibility. The one takeaway I would take from this executive order is that President Trump is obviously very determined to continue advancing the narrative regarding the reasons he lost the 2020 elections and shift that into policy changes in directions he wants to see in regards to the 2026 elections and future elections. That doesn't mean he'll succeed, and it's possible he doesn't want to succeed. This executive order is likely much more about political showmanship than actually changing U.S. elections, though it may have some negative consequences for the latter in the process. If you want to learn more about our elections, our Constitution, and our democracy, visit brookings.edu.
Now, this ain't joking. See, on June the 25th, U.S. District Judge Ada Talawan in Massachusetts blocked this executive order. That's correct. She blocked the Post Office and Homeland Security from implementing it. Now that's important because without this injunction, this stuff would be happening. And this three-judge panel, some of them were, one of them was appointed by President Biden, one was President Trump, and one was President Obama. So this panel that did this injunction realized the significance of this 90-day cooling down period. So it put a nationwide injunction on this executive order. And so what the administration did earlier this month, they asked the United States Supreme Court to intervene, calling the lower court's injunction a ruse, something that's extraordinary. Now, in the absence of this court ruling, this 90-day cool-off period would have been abdicated. It's just amazing how this important provision that makes a difference, that protects you and me in this 90-day cool-off period. You see, this ruling counts. And in the absence of this ruling, in 23 states, this injunction covers 23 states. So it sort of blocks. So when people think that they're playing, that they're joking, why would they take it to the Supreme Court to try to overrule this injunction? This isn't play, this is real. So they want to get control of state voting rights, and it's going to have an impact. Let me tell you why, because you need to hear the rest of the story. Now, here's where things get interesting. And you can take one thing from today's broadcast that is likely going to happen. Everything I've told you sounds like the door is closed. 30 states sued, 21 losses by the administration, a nationwide injunction on mail-out ballot order. But there's an argument moving through the courts right now that could open the door back up. And it starts, guess where? In Fulton County, Georgia. There's a lawsuit seeking Georgia's unredacted voter file. The Department of Justice made a filing that reads in part, and we're going to quote it here using their own language, the 90-day quiet period will prevent a state like Georgia from investigating and removing ineligible persons off the roll. But if the state of Georgia wanted to do individual moving, that's okay. So they're trying to find a way to get around it. They're trying to find a distinction, an argument that can allow them to systematically remove people within that 90-day quiet period. And the Department of Justice is leading on this. It's systematic. It suggests that individual groups or individual lists can be used to remove people. So the Department of Justice argues that, hey, if we individualize it, then the 90-day rule doesn't count. They're systematically trying to figure out a way to get around it. So this is insidious. This is real. And few of us are paying attention to it. Thank God that Congress had the wherewithal to pass that 1993 Voter Registration Act. And attorneys can agree or disagree. But this 90-day period, thanks to the injunction, is still in place. And this 90-day period is going to make a difference. Now, the Department of Justice is leaning in. They're looking at some law that happened in Florida that said that you can come in and you can override this quiet period. And it happened. So they're pulling straws. They're going all over. They're consistent, and they're not giving up. And that's why it's important for you to know about this 90-day period. It's important for you to understand what's going on because the legacy media isn't talking about this. Think about it. Why would they take it to the Supreme Court if they didn't want it done? Now, what I want to do is look at this. What's settled and what isn't? And I want to draw this line clearly because that is what this program exists to do. Not to be biased, but to state the facts. Of course, we're going to have opinions. But this 90-day quiet period is now in effect and it remains in effect through Election Day, November the 3rd. The Department of Justice litigation to get the unredacted voter file stands at 0 wins, 21 losses, with 9 active cases. The 23-state injunction blocking the Postal Service mail-out order remains in place, pending a Supreme Court decision next year. Now, whether the Department of Justice individualized removal argument in Georgia will be accepted by the court, who knows? Whether the Supreme Court takes up this case in Arizona, who knows? The question that the court will resolve won't happen before the midterms. And whether the Supreme Court, under this shadow docket they use, grants the administration's request on mail-out ballot orders, we don't know. And that could come because you know they have used that shadow docket to put all kind of stuff in place that with no rationale, no logic behind it, you just say, and nobody signs it, you just put it out there. What does it mean for you? This is what it means. Whenever the court eventually decides, today, the practical thing is that it's going to have limited impact on you. I want to do something, Mike, right quick before we take a break. Let's do this. Let's pause here and let's do this. I want you to play, Mike, the democracy docket attorney explain this, because I think it's important that we understand it. I think it's important that we get a clear understanding of it. And if you want to understand the shallow docket, we did a show on it maybe about 3 weeks ago. And we encourage you to go back and look at that show because it explains how the shadow docket works. It explains that see, something that was designed to be administrative, since about 2014, the Supreme Court has used it to issue orders. Nobody signs it, no rationale, no brief, no discussion. They just issue it, and it has a tremendous impact. But I want you to hear from Mark Elas with Democracy Docket, and they're doing a wonderful job fighting for the American people, fighting for democracy, fighting for your right to vote. Let's look at that tape right quick, Mike. We can't hear it. We can't hear it out here, Mike.
He's not doing all of these things because he plans that when he loses the election, when his party gets kicked out of control of Congress, when they even potentially lose the Senate, that he is just going to say, oh, well, that's just the way it happens in a democracy. We have to accept the results. He's laying this groundwork now. The old-time voter suppression tactics that Republicans employed was to make it harder for you to vote, right? To put arbitrary obstacles in your way. For example, if they wanted to make it harder for you to vote by mail, they'd do away with drop boxes. If they wanted to make it harder for you to register to vote, they'd say no more online voter registration. And if they wanted to subvert the outcomes, well, they would just put election deniers in office. And all of those things are still going on. But the biggest threat, the most prominent threat, the thing that they are, in fact, not even hiding, but they are shouting about at the top of their lungs, is an effort to create a master list of eligible voters. Now, part of this requires them to get access to state voter files. You know about that if you are a subscriber to Democracy Docket, because we have written about it. I've written about it. I have done previous episodes on it. If you are not already a subscriber to Democracy Docket, now would be an excellent time to become one. You can do so by clicking on the link in front of you or in the description of this episode, or you can type in democracydocket.com/YouTube. And if you do that, you will get access to a wealth of information and newsletters that help keep you informed. But central to what I am describing has been this effort by the Department of Justice to get access to every state's sensitive voter data. Now, to understand this, you need to realize that when you register to vote, your state, your county, but then it rolls up to the state, has a detailed picture of you as a voter. They know when you registered. They know whether you registered as a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. They know whether you voted in Democratic or Republican primaries. They know if you are someone who only votes in, say, presidential cycles, or whether you vote in midterms. Maybe you don't vote in local elections, but you only vote in federal elections. They know your social security number. They know your date of birth. They probably have a specimen of your signature on file. right? They've got all of this information, and Donald Trump's administration is trying to get their hands on it too. Because you see, in our country, states administer elections, not the federal government. So there's no reason why, up until now, the federal government has had this data. But the Department of Justice has been desperate to get their hands on this data. And the reason is because if they can get that information from all 50 states, if they can collect this information from one corner of the country to another, they can create a master list, and then they can decide, you know what, we don't really want this person on the list. We don't want this person because, well, we think based on their last name, they may not be a U.S. citizen. We don't want this person on the list, well, because, well, we just don't want this person on the list. If that sounds fanciful, if it sounds unbelievable, then frankly, you haven't been paying attention to what Donald Trump and his administration have been up to for the last year and a half. They are weaponizing every aspect of government against Donald Trump's political opponents, but they're also weaponizing government against anything and anyone who will stand in his way for retaining and expanding his political power. And right now, the big threat they face is that after the 2026 midterm elections, after everyone's had a chance to vote, the voters will decide they don't want Republicans controlling Congress. And Donald Trump doesn't want that to happen. So he's been doing all of these things, including having the Department of Justice ask for these voter files, cajole for these voter files, sue to get access to these voter files. You probably know my law firm and I, we've been litigating back and preventing that from happening. So far, we're undefeated. DOJ hasn't won anything. And those cases are now progressing in the courts. The other part of it, though, that is equally as important is that Donald Trump has issued an executive order. And in that executive order, he basically wants to create this list and tell the U.S. Postal Service that it actually can't even carry an absentee ballot envelope from anyone not on his list. That, in fact, they can't carry an absentee ballot to any voter who's not on their list. So essentially, Donald Trump wants to throttle all voting by mail to only people on his approved list. It's kind of like the reverse of the enemies list, right? All the enemies will be left off this list. Only Donald Trump's friends and the people that his sycophants and his enablers and his cronies, only the people on their list will be able to get an absentee ballot and be able to use the U.S. mail to return it. Now, look, that is also in the courts. My law firm and I, we sued as soon as that executive order was enacted. That case is before the D.C. Circuit on an emergency basis. There's another case going on brought by the state AGs. That case is weaving its way through court. And as I said, the best way to stay informed about all of these cases that I'm discussing is to be a Democracy Docket subscriber. Again, the link to do so is in the description to this episode and on the screen in front of you right now. But all right, so you've got Donald Trump trying to sue to get access to these lists. You've got Donald Trump telling the Postal Service, you know, get ready. We're going to give you a master list of who can vote by mail, and by negative implication, anyone not on that list can't vote by mail. And all of that is marching forward through the courts, as I just described. But as it does, the Department of Justice, the Trump administration, is having to explain itself. And suffice to say, it's not doing a very good job of convincing judges that it's all on the up and up. As I mentioned, just on the basic question of whether they are entitled to this data at all, the Department of Justice hasn't won anywhere. Put another way, they've lost everywhere. And they have now appealed all of those cases to the higher courts. I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking this is eventually going to wind up in the Supreme Court, and then, Mark, what happens? Look, I'm not here to tell you that in the end, I have confidence in the Supreme Court. I've made my position on that known pretty clearly. But I'll say this. I don't believe that this Supreme Court for the 2026 election will either be able or be inclined to do anything to help Donald Trump on this issue. Now, there are a lot of technical reasons for that. There's a lot of legal reasons for that, some of which you probably would say, Mark, you're being naive. But let me give you one practical thing. They're going on vacation. You know, the reason why I keep saying that June is the cruelest month, the reason why we get all these decisions from the Supreme Court in the month of June.
You've heard Mark Elias explain it. that 90-day fail-safe line that nobody's talking about. Thank God for that 90-day. And you heard him talk about the national voter list that they are trying to get. And let me just show you why what he's saying is important. There was an election last Tuesday. There was an election last Tuesday in Michigan. And a individual won. I think his name is Abdul El Said. He won a close election. Now understand the significance of this. The state of Michigan set up this election protocol. Two candidates in the Democratic primary ran against one another. It was a very, very close election. Abdul El Said won. Marco Rubio, who's over the Secretary of State, and they got 2 or 3. Trump got him over 3 departments. Never been done in the history of the United States. He's managing 3 departments. Anyway, some stuff you just can't explain it. It's perplexing. Marco Rubio, whose parents came from Cuba, put out a statement that they're going to make sure that Abdul El Said went through the legal process properly without fraud to become an American citizen. You can't make this up, man. This is like Alice in Wonderland. Off with his head. I mean, it's just beyond comprehension. You know the irony of this? Abdul El Said was born in Michigan. He's not a naturalized citizen. He's an American-born citizen. So you see what that potential national voter list can do? And that's what Attorney Ellis was talking about. Was talking about. Just your name, not knowing anything about you, could have you removed from the state voting list if we have a national voter list that Congress never intended to happen. Congress in the Constitution gave this power to the state, not to the president, not to Congress. And that's why it's so important for you to understand this 90-day period. Because in the absence of this 90-day period, anything could go now. Do you know they sent national troops into Michigan last Tuesday to so-called be election monitors? Yes. Yes. That's what they did. And they didn't send them in the whole state of Michigan. No. They sent them in Wayne County. They sent them in Detroit. They sent them in high urban areas. You know what? To deal with quote unquote potential voter fraud. Now, why is this important to you? And we're going to start here. You need to confirm your voter registration status through your state Secretary of State website. Don't wait. Don't wait till you get close to election. No, you need to go on that website right now. Make sure that you are still a registered voter. Make sure that you're not flashed. And you need to respond immediately. Do not wait. Because what happens is that all kind of, we're going to pause there. People think that they're safe. They think that if they go to the voter polls, they got these things called, if there's a discrepancy in your ballot, got these things called provisional ballots. You know the last time, in the last election, they threw out a lot of provisional ballots? Yes. And you know what just came to mind? Think about this. President Trump won the election in 2016. If memory serves me right, President Obama was president of the United States. And he didn't support President Trump. if memory serves me right, he supported Hillary Clinton. So if there was voter fraud or voter manipulation, they did one terrible job trying to commit voter fraud, because I saw President Trump won. President Trump lost the 2020 election. Who was control over all of the apparatus? Who controlled both parts, Congress, the Senate, the House, and the Supreme Court? Trump. So, when President Biden won the 2020 election, Trump said voter fraud. Trump was in charge. So when Biden and Obama was in charge, Trump won those elections, there was no voter fraud. When Trump was in charge, he alleged voter fraud. He controlled all apparatus of the process. That's why it's a problem, a solution looking for a problem. It's logically inconsistent. You just got to think about it. Right now, in 2024, Republicans gained control of both the House and the Senate and the presidency. Who was controlling the mechanisms? Joe Biden. Think about it. It doesn't make good nonsense. Because when the Democrats control the whole apparatus, Trump won. When Trump controlled the apparatus, him and the Republicans lost. And go even deeper than that. If there's so much voter fraud or illegal voting, then all of your senators were elected illegally. All of your governors were elected illegally. This doesn't even make good nonsense. And that's why this cool-off period has been so important for you. And this cool-off period is so important for me, because it counts. And thank God for allowing this provision to come in place. Now, I want you to see this last take. There are people out there who are fighting for American democracy. There are people out there who are making sure that your vote counts, that your vote matters. Why is that important? The last show we talked about this, and I just want to bring this to you. We talked about George Washington warning us about parties. And we didn't adhere to that warning. Think about this. Statistics show that 27% of the people identify with the Democratic Party. 27% of the people identify with the Republican Party. Let's pause there. 56% of the people identify as no party. Now, why is that important? The Democratic Party told you that you could only vote for Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. 27% of the people decided who you could vote for. The Republican Party told you you could vote for George Bush or Donald Trump. 27% of the people told you who you. They didn't give you a choice. You had to vote for one of those four candidates. That's not how it was initially. When Washington and Adams ran, the person who got the majority vote became president. The person who got the second largest number of votes became vice president of the United States. When did the system change? George Washington warned you and I. I'm going to suggest something here before we close this out. What if, in all the states where you can do it, people registered no party? People registered no party. Therefore, when you went into the voting place, you have to ask them, hey, they have to ask you, I'm sorry, what ballot you want? And that's put the power back in the hands of the people, taken away from parties. Because the system works. The fundamental problem is that on the fringes, they're trying to manipulate the system. And the administration has decided that they're going to control who can vote and who cannot vote. It was never designed that way. It was designed for you to have a choice. Think about it. Adams, Jefferson, two different parties, president, vice president. What happened? And if we would go back to that system, maybe some of the antics and some of the crazy stuff that they're trying to do wouldn't be necessary. And it's so important because, look, Article 1 says that the state legislatures should determine where voting is done, how voting is done. It says nothing about the president. It clearly says that the voting apparatus rests with the state. And that's key and that's so important. And that's important for you, and that's important for me. And you got to understand that. You got to understand who actually runs the election. And so I want you to get a clear understanding of this, because nowhere in the Constitution does it give the president the right to issue this kind of executive order. No, no, no. Article 1, Section 4 sets the time and places and manners for federal elections. And it prescribed that the states should manage these elections. And Congress shouldn't alter these rules. Article 1, Section 4 sets the time and the places, I'll say it again, for federal elections to be prescribed by each state legislature, with Congress having a power to alter those rules. Nowhere does it say the president, not once. Nowhere does it say the president, through executive orders or anything, can alter this process. Executive Order 14399, this order that says the post office can determine what mail is going to receive and what mail is going to send out. That is fundamentally un-American, and it goes against the Constitution. The Constitution does not grant these powers to the President of the United States. Congress reserved that power to determine voter eligibility, and the states alone manages it. And the states alone handle who registers to vote and who doesn't, not the executive branch. No. Now, this administration disagrees, and this disagreement is before the Supreme Court. The United States Solicitor General has said that Judge Talleyrand's ruling is extraordinary, and they're asking the courts to overrule this case. And it's pending at this broadcast time, and legacy media isn't talking about it. So the legal question here, and it's all that we've been dealing with, for your vote to count, Congress passed certain laws, and these laws protect you. And these laws are designed to make sure that the states determine who is an eligible voter and who's not the federal government. This has never been done in the history of the United States. The closest thing to it was in the 1800s under the Reconstruction Act, when Congress, who passed those civil rights bills, not the president, not through executive order, Congress passed both of those bills in 1867 and 1866, passed by both chambers of Congress. And those Reconstruction Acts placed military people in those insurrection states to make sure that people had the right to vote, not to interfere with the voting. So, no time in the history of the United States has an executive order of this nature been issued. not doing any war that's going all the way back to the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, COVID-19. This has never been done before. An executive order to set up a national voter data bank in the United States of America to determine who is an eligible voter. Never been done. You remember what I told you Marco Rubio said about Abdul al-Said? We're going to check and make sure that he followed all the protocols and procedures to become American citizen just because of his name. Just because of his name. Now, the question for you and I, and the big question today, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to vote? Are you going to utilize what Congress have allowed to not to be interfered with? That's so key. That's so important. So as we close tonight, I want you to contemplate on this, because legacy media isn't discussing it. You see that 90-day fail-safe line that Congress drew in 1993? I don't know if it's going to hold before the Supreme Court. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have a crystal ball. But what I'm saying to you is that because of that 90-day provision, that fail-safe provision, Congress has protected you. What are you going to do with it? We want to remind you that in America, a voteless people is a hopeless people. We encourage you to make your vote count. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and don't let false narratives allow you to buy into something that's not in your best interest. This has been Reverend Dr. Donald R. Jones. It has been Talk What You Know, the 90-day fail-safe line. Look forward to being with you next time here right in New Orleans Talk Network Studios. If you like what we're talking about, we encourage you to like it and subscribe and pass it on to a friend, because we're doing here what the legacy media isn't doing. We're keeping you informed. Look forward to being with you next time.